Members of the Senate are focusing on gun rights.
Major ruling involving the Second Amendment.
The Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling.
Major Supreme Court ruling.
Amendment.
The Supreme Court will be taking up a gun rights case.
A landmark ruling shocks the nation. In a rare moment of complete agreement, the United States Supreme Court has issued a unanimous 9-0 ruling that's sending shockwaves across the country. This isn't just another case. It's a major decision involving the Second Amendment, one of the most fiercely debated parts of the U.S. Constitution. Legal analysts and commentators were quick to react, noting that such unity among the justices, liberal, conservative, and centrist alike, is almost unheard of in today's polarized climate. But that's exactly what happened. Every justice from both ideological wings of the court stood together on this one. The ruling marks a major turning point in American gun law, clarifying how far the government can go when restricting firearm possession, and, perhaps more importantly, reaffirming what the Constitution protects under the Second Amendment. As details of the decision began to unfold, legal experts described it as a strong message from the court about individual rights and the limits of government power. And for millions of Americans watching this unfold, one question stands out. What does this 9-0 ruling really mean for gun rights in America? On the case behind the decision, this landmark ruling centers on a case that started quietly, but quickly grew into a constitutional battle watched across the nation. The case began when a man from Texas, Zachary Rahimi, was charged under a federal law that prohibits individuals who are subject to domestic violence, restraining orders from possessing firearms. Prosecutors argued that Rahimi had violated that law, and the lower courts initially upheld the government's position. But when the case reached the Supreme Court, it raised a much larger question. Does the government have the constitutional authority to take away someone's gun rights based on a civil restraining order, not a criminal conviction? That question forced the justices to examine the very heart of the Second Amendment, balancing public safety against the fundamental right to keep and bear arms. During oral arguments, the government emphasized the need to protect victims of domestic violence, claiming that restricting gun access for individuals under restraining orders is a vital safeguard. On the other hand, Rahimi's defense argued that the law went too far, stripping citizens of their constitutional rights without a criminal trial or conviction. This tension between safety and liberty is what ultimately drew the full attention of the Supreme Court. And when the justices delivered their opinion, they did something few expected. The Supreme Court's unanimous ruling. When the Supreme Court released its decision, the outcome was clear and historic. In a 9-0 unanimous vote, the justices ruled that the federal government does have the authority to temporarily restrict gun ownership for individuals who pose a credible threat of violence, including those under domestic restraining orders. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the court, emphasized that this decision does not undermine the Second Amendment. Instead, he explained, it upholds the principle that while the right to bear arms is fundamental, it is not unlimited. Roberts pointed out that, throughout American history, legislatures have always placed limits on gun ownership for people deemed dangerous to society, and that this ruling aligns with that long-standing tradition. In other words, the court recognized a legitimate governmental interest in protecting potential victims of violence without rewriting the Constitution or weakening the Second Amendment. What made this case remarkable wasn't just the outcome, but the unity behind it. Even justices who often disagree on matters of gun rights, from Justice Clarence Thomas to Justice Sonia Sotomayor, found common ground. Each agreed that this was not about expanding government control, but about drawing a reasonable line between individual rights and public safety. The ruling reinforces a key message. The Constitution protects responsible gun ownership, not reckless endangerment. Legal and political reactions. The court's decision immediately ignited a wave of responses from across the legal and political spectrum. Many legal scholars praised the ruling as a thoughtful clarification of Second Amendment boundaries. They noted that the court had avoided the extremes, neither expanding gun rights beyond precedent nor giving the government unchecked power to restrict them. One constitutional law professor described the decision as a rare example of balance, where public safety and constitutional fidelity actually coexist. From Capitol Hill, the reaction was mixed but measured. Lawmakers who support stronger gun regulations welcomed the ruling, saying it affirms that the government can act to protect victims of abuse without violating the Constitution. Meanwhile, gun rights advocates, including groups like the NRA, expressed cautious approval. They saw the unanimous decision as confirmation that the Second Amendment remains robust and that future restrictions will still face strict constitutional scrutiny. In the broader political landscape, the unity of the justices was seen as a significant moment. At a time when the court is often viewed as deeply divided along ideological lines, a 9-0 ruling sent a powerful signal that certain constitutional principles still transcend partisan politics. Still, debates continue. Critics on both sides warn that the ruling could set new precedents, either empowering lawmakers to craft broader gun restrictions or encouraging future challenges to existing ones. For now, however, most observers agree on one point. This decision has redefined how courts, lawmakers, and citizens alike will interpret the limits of gun rights in America. What this means for gun owners and the future of the Second Amendment. For millions of gun owners across the country, this ruling may raise an important question. Does it change how the Second Amendment works in practice? According to legal experts, the short answer is not directly. The court did not expand or restrict gun ownership rights in general. Instead, it clarified that the government can temporarily disarm individuals who pose a proven threat of violence, as long as due process is respected. This means that everyday law-abiding citizens won't see any new restrictions because of this decision. However, it does strengthen the legal foundation for courts and states to take preventive action in cases involving domestic abuse or credible threats. More broadly, the ruling helps define the framework for future gun cases. Since the landmark 2022 Bruin decision, which expanded gun rights by striking down restrictive licensing laws, lower courts have struggled to interpret how far those rights extend. This new 9-0 ruling sends a clear signal. The Supreme Court supports a historically grounded but balanced approach to gun regulation. In other words, the Second Amendment is alive and strong, but not absolute. The government can act when someone's access to firearms presents a genuine danger to others, but it must do so within constitutional limits. For constitutional scholars, this case marks an evolution in how the court interprets the balance between individual liberty and collective safety, a balance that continues to define the American legal system. Public reaction and broader social impact. Beyond the courtroom and legal analysis, the public response to the Supreme Court's decision has been strikingly diverse. For many Americans, particularly survivors of domestic violence, the ruling offered a sense of relief. Advocacy groups praised the court for recognizing the real danger posed by armed abusers and for protecting victims without undermining constitutional rights. One advocacy leader called it a decision that literally saves lives. Meanwhile, gun rights supporters largely welcomed the clarity. They saw the ruling as a sign that the court remains committed to upholding the Second Amendment, even when addressing sensitive issues like domestic violence. For them, the unanimous 9-0 vote proved that constitutional rights can coexist with sensible protections. Across the country, public discourse around gun ownership and personal safety continues to evolve. In town halls, online forums, and community discussions, Americans are re-examining what responsible gun ownership truly means. The ruling has reignited important conversations about how to prevent violence without eroding fundamental freedoms, and about where the line should be drawn between individual rights and collective responsibility. Sociologists note that moments like this, where the highest court in the land speaks with one voice, can shape not just law, but culture. By uniting around a shared interpretation of the Second Amendment, the court has potentially reset the tone for future debates, encouraging dialogue over division. Conclusion and the legacy of the 9-0 decision. The unanimous 9-0 Supreme Court ruling represents more than just a legal technicality. It marks a potential turning point in American civil rights and federal accountability. For nearly 8 decades, federal agents operated under near-total immunity, with courts routinely dismissing lawsuits before victims could even present evidence. That era of unchallenged discretion has now been fundamentally altered. By narrowing the scope of immunity, the court has empowered lower courts to examine the reasonableness of federal actions and the adherence to proper procedures. This opens the door for victims of wrong address raids to not only reclaim property, but also pursue compensation for violations of their constitutional rights. In practice, this ruling transforms the balance of power between citizens and federal law enforcement, ensuring that accountability is no longer purely theoretical. The decision's ripple effects are already visible at both federal and state levels. Agencies are reassessing their operational protocols, and some states are asserting newfound oversight authority. Legislation is being drafted to require federal agents to follow stricter verification processes, notify state authorities, and submit to local oversight. Special compensation funds are being created to assist victims while legal battles unfold, ensuring that justice can be more immediate and tangible. For gun owners, civil rights advocates, and ordinary Americans, the ruling underscores a critical lesson: preparation and vigilance matter. Documenting property, installing security systems, and having legal counsel ready are no longer optional. They are essential tools to protect rights and leverage the new legal framework. Ultimately, the legacy of this 9-issue decision will be measured not just by the legal arguments in courtrooms, but by the extent to which citizens, attorneys, and states use the moment to demand real reform. It has opened a door that has been closed for generations, challenging a culture of unchecked federal immunity. Whether this leads to meaningful systemic change or fades as another footnote in Supreme Court history depends on collective action, public awareness, and the willingness of victims to step forward. The court has spoken with a rare, unified voice. Now it is up to Americans to ensure that its message resonates, creating a lasting shift in the accountability of federal law enforcement. The opportunity is unprecedented, and its consequences could reshape the relationship between the federal government and the citizens it serves for decades to come. If you found this breakdown helpful and eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who need to know this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into important legal news like this. I also want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. How do you think the Supreme Court ruling will affect federal agencies and citizens? Have you or someone you know ever been impacted by a wrong address raid? Your stories and opinions could be featured in future videos, so don't hold back.